Hello and welcome back to the second episode of the C-Suite Cyber Podcast. The C-Suite Cyber Podcast enables C-Suite executives to make security-informed decisions.
That's right. So I guess we'll introduce ourselves again. So my name is Mike. I have a background in both the blue side and the red side, starting out in the SOC, doing a little pen testing, then back in the SOC, then back to purple team. I just do whatever. How about you?
I'm AJ. Started in threat hunting, moved to purple, built purple team, and then now I'm doing other stuff.
All right, we'll go ahead and get our sponsor break in, then we'll dive into the topics today. So this episode is brought to you by your go-to penetration testing partner, Tandem Cyber Solutions. But that's not all they do. With their new hacker-powered security program, you can have the hacker perspective all year round. So long gone are the days where you get your penetration test and next week you make a configuration and you don't find out to the next pen test that you have a vulnerability in your network. So now you can integrate your hackers, your pen testers into your project planning and your IT projects in general and have their perspective all year so they can identify the vulnerabilities and shore up your security from day one. So for more information, you can reach out to Tandem Cyber Solutions at their website at tandemcybersolutions.com/C-Suite Cyber. All right, so what are we talking about today?
Yeah, so today we're going to discuss choosing vendors, and that's what will apply to penetration testing, which obviously we have a great recommendation there. It could be security products, could be even email and networking, right? It really applies to anything and everything under the sun.
Yep, lots of vendors.
So first off, I think this is important, but I've talked to a few of my friends who own businesses, and it's funny, this is not an issue for them. I think you should have requirements. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of vendors out there that do the same thing or very similar things, and you really want to get to the point where you're kind of comparing them apples to apples versus apple to oranges. So like your requirements do that. Kind of puts them all on that even playing field, and you can be like, all right, so this guy kind of does this thing, they do this thing, and you can kind of see who they are. But, to me, one of the things I pay attention to, and I don't know about you, is like the maturity. Like how long have they been around? How secure is their product? Because a lot of the startups, we've been seeing ourselves I know since I've been in that the startups, they really shoot for functionality first and then worry about security later, which is we see that in software all the time anyways, and in general. So, security can be a big issue, which we saw with CrowdStrike. Not to say that they're not a mature company or anything. I don't know what the back end looks like. It can happen, but I would say more frequently you're likely to have problems with at least a younger company in general.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's also important to understand that going into that purchase agreement, right? Like you need to know if it is secure. Has it actually been tested, or are they just trying to sell you their minimally viable product in order to build a customer base, right? And maybe that works for you, maybe it doesn't. But again, that's why you should have requirements. So I thought it was real interesting to hear from a business owner that they typically don't have requirements. They kind of just reach out to different people, see some demos, and then they're like, oh, well, I think this works for us, so we'll just go with this. And they don't really compare or actually test similar to what we might do at an enterprise level.
Yeah, it makes sense though too, especially for a smaller business who's looking for a vendor. They might not have the time or the capacity to really put these vendors through their paces. They can be like, okay, yeah, that looks cool. We'll rock with that. See what.
Yeah. Hopefully they're not, using the Gartner magic quadrant to make decisions.
Yeah, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not bad. I will say, like, the more mature companies on there for sure. Now, how good they are, it always depends on use cases, which goes back to your original statement, comparing and having a set of requirements, because you got to make sure what they're going to do is going to work for you. We'll talk about security later, but just making sure they align with your goals is a huge thing. And so you really want to test it against the use case you had in mind the whole time. Otherwise, it's a waste of money.
Yeah. And I think it's also important to see if there's other areas that it can feed into, right? So if you are a small managed business and you're looking at, I don't know, a network appliance or something, right? We'll go there. Can you easily ship those logs to your ADR or any other area that like you're actually looking at logs or any potential issues arising so that you can, see that early instead of your client going down or you're going down? There's definitely like not more important, but there's other things than just the specific individual use case. So I think that's something that might also get overlooked.
Yeah, for sure. Especially with younger companies, you aren't really, in that particular case, they're not really thinking about logging. They're not thinking about log aggregation, so they don't really care. But as they get better, like this thing doesn't really work well with our log aggregation plans at all. We may need to think about doing something differently. Or maybe we have a SIM already. It doesn't have the ability to ingest these specific logs because some of them aren't as easy as others. If you have Splunk where you can kind of regex and build something out to parse anything, and there's several others just like that, but not all of them are like that. You have to wait on the vendor to build a parser in order to ingest it and be able to search the different fields. So it could add additional complexities to your security program for sure. I mean, that's a really good point. Thinking about the future, what are the plans for your security program? Not only will it work now, but will it work 5 years from now or 3? Well, people probably do like 3-year contracts. 3 years from now, are we still going to like our tool?
Yeah. And also with complexity comes cost, right? Are you going to need to hire someone else? Do you have to have a special support level in order to actually use this product? What does that overhead actually look like from more than just a dollar perspective?
Yeah, that's a good point. Because, I mean, I don't know about you. When I've worked in SOCs, I've seen, I started my career in a SOC, but we would see people who had a SIN for, I don't know how many years, and we'd take it over as a company, and they just turned it on. That's it. And so, like, the complexity there, I mean, I don't know how complex you would say that is, but you're not using it to the full capacity either. So you got this thing, you thought it was going to do well, but you didn't really fully utilize it, which I think happens quite a bit. I mean, I've seen, billion-dollar companies spend all this money on security tools and they're not even hardly using them. They just put them up there, maybe check the box, or they thought they were going to work automatically. And so they didn't really engage with the vendor to figure out, well, how do I maximize the use of this thing or actually implement it? Those are all huge questions that are part of the requirements and then part of like actually implementing. I mean, it happened all the time. Almost every customer was like that.
I've definitely seen it. And I've also seen kind of the flip side to this as well, right? Where someone already in the organization might not be open to a new product or automation in some fashion because that impacts their job and maybe they bill hourly or something to that effect. So they want it to stay as is because they're able to basically milk whatever that process is that they're getting paid for rather than being faster and actually allowing innovation and automation and inside there.
Have you actually seen that before?
Yes, in the government, 100%.
Oh, okay. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Government contractors paid by the hour, lots by the hour.
Yeah, we
That's
were
insane.
just trying to do like PowerShell and I forgot what it is, but there's like a PowerShell command to like spit the output into like a GUI basically. And we were just trying to do some selections through there and we couldn't even do that. Like we completely shut that down. So it was, yeah. And it was like a few logs at that point. So, there's millions of logs coming in and then he's like, absolutely no, can't do that. So
Security, man.
Yeah. That's the thing.
Yeah.
So what about after you have requirements? Now I know you and I have done this in the past, but I'm curious if you've seen other small businesses do this to the effect of actually testing their use case or testing the product. Going back to what you said about comparing apples to apples, not apples to oranges, to make sure that they're getting a more complete view of what could be.
No. Typically, no.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, really, again, they just don't have the personnel. Maybe they're also don't have the expertise in the product either. I think me and you have this weird breadth of knowledge. So we kind of know what's out there. We know what a good product should be doing. We know, like, we can do it pretty easy, and we can make up what we don't know by just watching a quick video and trying to understand this product and how it may be implemented or used in the future. And we can probably tell if the vendor's BSing us pretty quickly. Like, no, it doesn't. It does not do that. There's no way. And these smaller businesses who have, like, especially like on the smaller side, like we're talking maybe 2 or 3 people on their IT staff, that's where you have a problem, especially with security products too. If they're kind of tiptoeing in another realm, they're not experienced in, that's where they definitely run into trouble. So they kind of have 2 options. One, they can believe the vendor, whatever they say, and just, okay, so that sounds like an honest guy. I'll take his word for it. 2, take the recommendation of a buddy, which is interesting because I don't know if you read this article. There's like this company, and they were essentially paying CISOs to buy products. They were giving them like these points or something like that. And the more stuff they essentially sold, the more they got back, like every year. Like they basically got paid for referring all the products in the suite that this, I don't know if they were a VC, but they were a big investor. And they basically had like almost everything these investors own were unicorn companies. They were all security related unicorn companies. And it was a big kind of expose came out about it. And that's how they were all unicorns, because they were paying the CISOs to recommend it, refer it, all these things. My point is, you got to be careful about that. You know, you have that kind of good old boy network and like, yeah, this is all I know. I'm recommending it because I don't know any better, but it's good enough. You know, I don't have any problem, but they're not actually the daily users. That's where the problem comes in. I know you've probably run into it too. Like, okay, this guy bought it. They didn't get any input into it. We use it. And it's like, what do you want me to do with this crap? You know, but for small businesses, yeah, they're kind of stuck in that area where they don't really know any better, and they're just trying to get something to fill a need. And I think, you know, it kind of sucks because they have to rely on vendors to find vendors in that case, right? Have a trusted security partner who can figure that stuff out, which I do for some of our clients, especially the ones I've worked with for years. Are like, hey, can you help me work through this crap and help me find something that's actually going to work? Yeah, sure, I got you. But that takes time to build up. And my honesty gets me in trouble sometimes, but that's kind of what you want in circumstances like this. You got to have faith that the vendor that you're putting your faith in to, you know, cut through all this other nonsense is leading you in the right direction. Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, for sure. And I think if you are a security provider, right, you have that trust already established, hopefully. So it might be easier to trust someone who is responsible for any downstream effects of implementing a new solution. Because if something goes wrong, right, that comes back to you because you recommended it. And if you're over the security of that customer, then congratulations, you just bought yourself an incident. So I've seen that as well, but it's a good point. The kickbacks with the scissors and stuff reminds me a lot of the movie Pain Hustlers, where the doctors were basically getting kickbacks to prescribe certain medications, and they would get like vacations, they would get new cars because it was so much per script that they wrote. Sounded very similar to that.
Yep. It's like black magic working in the background. But yeah, I was going to say too, like from a consulting perspective, like doing pen tests, that's why typically, and a lot of my friends who do the same thing, they try to have the same mindset when they recommend stuff. They're recommending a class of solution versus specific vendors for that reason.
Yeah.
This is the thing. It needs to be able to do this to solve the problem. We don't say vendor specifically. Now, if they ask, hey, what do you think about this vendor? Then sure, we'll give advice like, yeah, I can kind of bypass that, or I've ran into these things with it, or this type of configuration, or you have to be careful with this type of implementation that can lead to this thing. So like we try to be agnostic is the word. Vendor agnostic is kind of the word that we use in the pen testing realm. For that specific reason, because we don't want to say, hey, use this guy, and then you find out a week later they were breached. You're like, ah, crap.
Yeah.
You know, it happens. You know, and it's kind of that mindset that we have in security that a lot of people don't have to deal with normally in their kind of tower, their vertical, which is we assume the worst. We assume everyone's going to get breached. And so we kind of have, I hate to use the word zero trust because I think that's well overused. But it's, I like to think more of the X-Files, trust no one, and it's just assume something bad's going to happen. How do you kind of put compensating measures in place in case it were to happen? And we can talk about MSPs being breached, and there's so many stores, and I think we'll go into that later. But yeah, I mean, you have to be careful. You have to plan for this stuff, and like going back to requirements, you just got to make sure it fills the need, and it's not going to open up any dangerous holes in your security posture. Period.
Yeah, and we've definitely seen larger organizations as vendors just kind of be like, yeah, we detect everything. So if we look at security, which is obviously our space, if a company is like, yeah, we detect everything on MITRE's attack framework, right? Cool. And then you run something, you run a variation, or you switch a parameter, and then all of a sudden it's not detected anymore. So it's like, all right, you're just lying to people, and you're lying to people because you are just like checking the box, right? Oh, we detected one thing, so now we can say that we can detect this. But it's not, obviously nothing's going to be every variation, but it's not really in context. And going further on that really depends on the implementation and the engineering aspect of it, right? So that's another thing. A tool can be great. It's not going to be a silver bullet, but it can be great. It can also be virtually useless depending on the settings and the environment or whoever has configured it, right? It's all based on like your actual implementation, not just what you've seen or what it can do.
I have a question for you. I feel like that statement was targeting a vendor specifically. Do you want to name and shame, or do you want to keep that one to yourself?
They have a heat map that is full of red, and many people will know who that is.
I went to a conference this year in Miami. It was I forget what it was called, a leadership conference for like cybersecurity. And they made you sit with vendors like every day for like 2 hours or something like that. They paid for the ticket, but you had to sit there and talk with vendors. They paid for food, all that stuff, drinks, whatever. Anyway, some of the vendors are just like, are you serious, man? They're like, oh yeah, we can stop anything. And this may not make sense to a lot of people, but I know it will to you. Like, forgot the name of the security product, and they were basically what you're talking about. Yeah, we can detect everything, and it's running in user land only. And I'm like, no, you can't. False.
Yeah.
False. So I guess to explain that a little bit, so I just don't lose anyone. So in Windows, you have this concept of user land, which is where most users operate. And then kernel land, which is like really lower level in the operating system, where a lot of your antivirus and security products operate. Same with drivers. Whenever you install hardware, that's all kind of kernel level as well. But if you're in user land, the problem is that anything that's running at that same level as the user can just get rid of that product and just kill it or make it not work. So that's why a lot of them go into kernel land, because it becomes a lot more difficult to kind of interfere with that product at that level because it's more powerful. Kernel means more powerful. User means not very powerful. So yeah, so that was like one of those things that we know the vendors kind of lying at that point, but they said, yeah, there's no way this thing works that well. You gotta be kidding. Get the crap out of here.
Yeah. Well,
But
and
you
there's
just get that, salesmen don't know anything anyway. They're not experts. They know all these buzzwords. They know all these things they're supposed to say, and they're just gonna, just spill all this crap at you just to get the sell for the most part.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things like you've seen it, you've exploited it as well, right? Actually executing inside of memory is very hard to detect and probably very costly from a memory perspective. So that is something that is always going to be targeted probably until something eventually ends up. But like there's always something that can be exploited to get around the tool. So it's important to keep in mind. And like you mentioned earlier, it's just about compensating controls, right? What can you have in place in addition to that to help you catch whatever malicious activity may be going on? Or even if it's not a security product, what do you have that you are collecting that might give you the same information that you're looking for. It just might not be from that product.
Yeah. Like Anthony and I have pretty much the same, I guess, mindset when we look at security, where you have a lot of overlapping. And it's, when I was in the military, that's what we talked about too. When I was in the infantry, you want those overlapping sections of fire so that they just don't stop there. They're overlapping so that you can cover down. If the other person's trained a different way, you can kind of cross and compensate for each other. And that's what you want in cybersecurity. You want overlapping fields of fire. There you go. There's a word. It's been over 10 years. I forget. But you want to overlap. You want to compensate. Like you said, if one's taken out, maybe one of them can pick up and still see that thing that was taken out. And the idea is you have less and less areas that they can kind of sneak through, and you're increasing the time it takes to disable your security or work around your security, buying time for your personnel to identify that something bad has happened and to start isolating stuff and responding. But it's a cat and mouse game at the end of the day. And you got to make it costly to the attacker without making it too costly for the defender. And hopefully get breached less. Not never, less. It's going to happen at some point.
So say you have your requirements, you've done your testing, right? You're ready to make a selection. I haven't been involved in too many contracts, so I'm hoping.
I was going to say, let's take a step back and talk about the testing, because we really didn't talk about testing at all. So you're really good at testing, and I think you do this more than me. Talk about like so once you have the requirements, how do you go about testing and then comparing the results of those tests for the vendors?
Yeah, usually requirements are probably the downfall of most testing that I've seen. So, for example, comparing a free product that comes pre-installed to an enterprise level product that costs a ton of money per year, right? When you look at the surface, something that's free, you assume should be less valuable than something that you're paying for. And then you evaluate. So again, security, run the same set of tests. So if you're testing 1, 2, 3 against vendor A, you need to test 1, 2, 3 against vendor B, right? Ideally, it should be the exact same data that you're running against the two vendors in order to see who does better at what, and what in security land, what are the ratios of prevented, detected, and alerted, for example, right?
Can you explain those three things real quick?
Yeah,
everyone?
so prevented would be you are not able to perform an action, right? I try to steal your cake and I can't get to your cake because your house is locked. Detected would be I steal your cake, but because your dog starts barking at me and then you see me running off. And then, well, I guess that would be alerted. And then detected, because companies mix the two and it's very annoying. Detected would basically just be it's logged, essentially, right? At least that's how we use it in our organization. So I'm able to see that the cake was taken, and then the dog barking would be the alerted piece.
But you have to be looking for it, right? Like it was detected, it's somewhere, but maybe no one actually saw it because the alert wasn't generated. But if you go back retroactively, you can see that, yeah, we did in fact see it. We just didn't have anything to trigger for it.
Yeah, and that's why I prefer the term logged, not detected, because to me, if it's not surfaced to an analyst, right? So if we're not sending it to the SOC analyst or to our managed security provider, then it's not detected, in my opinion, because I have to go look for it. So I would consider that the differentiator between logged and detected. But typically, they'll be used interchangeably.
And I'd like to point out too that a lot of stuff is actually logged in an organization. I've worked a ton working with logs in all kinds of organizations, big and small, and often the information is there, but they may not have the knowledge to be able to find that it's there, or there's so many pieces of the security puzzle isolated from each other that it's there, but the people who need to know don't know that the data exists, which is just as bad of a problem as it almost not existing.
Yeah. And in a smaller organization, hopefully you don't have that issue, right? Hopefully if you need access to the data, you already have that. And then I think that's a piece that we do well at in larger organizations is us being like Mike and AJ, us, not the collective us, right? But knowing what exists from a logging perspective and what can be used to satisfy something else. So if we're, I don't know, looking at like network connections, right? Maybe you don't have proxy logs, but you have sysmon ID3, which logs connections in the process. So like maybe you could use that instead of something that you're expecting to have that data. If something were to go down, say your appliance goes down or someone changes a certificate and does an update, and so all your data gets dropped.
Yeah, I think too that brings up another point. An area I used to love going into when I was actually like working in the SOC was, and it's another place where you can say it was logged somewhere, like technical forensics. I enjoyed using forensics and like odd logs that existed on the operating system to show that an event occurred. And that helps when, say, an attacker is on the system and he's killing logs or blocking logs from being shipped, but he may not be an expert in forensics, which most aren't. And you can utilize those artifacts to kind of fill in some of that narrative and say something did happen, even though our logs are lying to you. I think that's another thing we agree on too, is we don't trust our tools. We like to verify with multiple sources that an event happened, especially during an incident, because you don't want to make a mistake. A mistake could be costly. You're missing something. You're leaving the adversary in the network, whatever it is. But you need those multiple things that are kind of collaboratively pointing to a narrative that took place. And I know during the big SolarWinds fiasco, I used very odd application logs to show when the update was applied to each system on the network to prove like, okay, this is the time frame on the system that we need to be careful, because I think it was 3 or 4 updates that were affected by that specific attack. And so now I have a time window. Okay, it started this date. And now that kind of narrows when I need to be looking for bad stuff, essentially.
Right.
Yeah, but it's not something that went into a SIM or or got collected with log aggregation. It would just happen to be on the system. It wasn't tampered with, but it was there. But it helped. Yeah, just different perspective on the logged or detected piece there.
Yeah, and I think that's something that definitely comes with maturity and the security organization as a whole, because we've seen it at various organizations as well, right? Where you start out and it's kind of just, what do I see at face value? And then you slowly start to pivot, and maybe you're time boxing either side to collect more information, what happened before, what happened after. And then, you expand out and you start to build a list of things that you commonly collect or that you're looking for on a regular basis, build your playbooks or whatever you want to call it, and then go from there. But yeah, oftentimes we've seen where and also it's a knowledge share, right? A lot of times people just don't know. So if you do know, then you need to document it and share it. Like we've done several lunch and learns trying to share some of the stuff that we've built or run across doing our own investigations. So that's something that's very important, because I've seen many times where it's just not known, right?
I mean, it's part of that whole lessons learned part of the incident response process. We learned about all these things that we should have been using, or all these steps we should have took place, or this new tool, this new whatever. And now we're adding it to a playbook. Maybe we're ingesting those specific logs now, whatever it is. But you should always be improving. You should be learning from your mistakes. And all that is so that you can respond quicker. There's less damage. You have more insight, whatever it is. But should just be getting better all the time.
Yeah. And even if you're listening to this right now and you're like, well, I don't do security, I don't really need to like pay attention to this or whatever, lessons learned can be taken from anything, right? Mm-hmm. Like I stumbled and broke my arm. Well, I can learn something. Why did I stumble? My concrete's cracked. Cool. Fix the concrete. Like, it can be as simple as that. And again, I've seen some fun stuff in the government, and I've seen some not so fun stuff, is a nice way to put it, in the government and other organizations, where it's just like you thought something was common sense, and then an incident happens and they're like, why didn't you do this? Oh, well, it wasn't in my playbook, it wasn't in my SOP, I didn't know I was supposed to do this. Okay, now we're updating this, right? Like, here's another option for you to utilize.
Well, that's where I know at one point we had this whole mindset where I don't want to put it in a playbook because I don't want to make people lazy. Not lazy. Okay, that's a little rough. I don't want to make them solely dependent on documentation when, it's kind of weird to say, but investigations in cybersecurity is almost like an art form in a sense. You're relying on instinct to try to follow the trail, just like a real detective would do in a murder case. You're relying on instinct. You're trying to get in the mindset of whoever the adversary or the bad guy is and trying to figure out what they did, why they did it, the motive, means, motive. What's the third one? Isn't there 3 things they need for like murder? Means, motive, and
Isn't it like ability or
we need a lawyer on the podcast.
something like that?
Yeah. But you get in that mindset and that's where kind of the art piece comes in handy because you might be missing some evidence. You may be missing part of the trail, but if you can get in that mindset, you can pick the trail back up because you're able to kind of stumble along without following a playbook or whatever. You're using that experience, the intuition to take you along the right path where people who are just following the playbook, they're like, yep, I don't know. I don't know. And I see that all the time, but like pretty much everywhere I've been with red team engagements, anything adversarial, they're just like, all right, I give up. This was you, right? Okay, cool. All right, back to doing other stuff. Good job, guys. And not to beat up on, defenders have a tough time, especially those in the SOC, because they get abused mentally. I think in a lot of places, and it sucks. And so they, if it's not serious, not real, I'm going to go back to what is real, which is fair. But organizations who get all of that straight, where we have enough time for the analysts to research, to focus on this kind of stuff, to build up the lessons learned, you see a lot more maturity out of it. And I was lucky in the places where I worked in a SOC where we had that flexibility. Yeah, we had a lot of work, but we always had people doing research, people building out playbooks, people doing training. People were always doing training. So we're capturing those lessons learned. So when you have that high turnover, which is pretty common in a SOC, you have that high turnover. So capturing those lessons learned somewhere formally in a documentation and things like training and playbooks, with that turnover, you still have that knowledge there. They're still utilizing it. So it's good stuff and it happens. You get a good leadership in place. You're going to have that. You're just going to keep getting better, even if you have turnover, even if you have other work to do. You just have to kind of load balance the responsibilities and ensure you don't just force them to work out of playbooks all day.
Yeah, which is not
although it
fun.
helps. Yeah,
And it's means, motive, and opportunity. So I was close.
opportunity.
Oh well, I don't listen to true crime podcasts like some people I know.
Every girl I go on a date with, true crime. I was like, oh, so I don't need to meet you in a dark alley somewhere.
Yeah, it's a sign. Gotta be careful,
Yeah.
man.
Sit at a very lighted, well visited restaurant. All right, contracts.
Yeah, so on contracts, I haven't negotiated any contracts. Primarily, I focus on the testing aspect, right? Should we buy this product? Should we not buy this product? And then I'll kind of know the cost and whether or not it makes sense to me, or in the last eval I did, right? Like looking to replace one of our capabilities. And it just didn't make sense from a cost perspective because it really only increased your line of work, which has since changed. So glad we didn't go in a contract there. So do you have any experience with contracts? How do you approach the contract if you see that there's a better product, but maybe it's more expensive? Do you kind of just try to find a happy medium, or what are you doing in that scenario?
Man, contracts are interesting because there's a lot of kind of landmines to work your way through. So I'm gonna make this crap up on the spot here. The top things you should think about when you're looking at a contract. This will be a good, short for YouTube. Like, yeah. So one thing is like, what's in the contract? So what's actually covered under the responsibilities? It happens all the time where a client buys something, they think they got something in the statement of work or in yeah, that's usually what it covers under, but it's not. It is not their responsibility. It's the client's responsibility. So You're like, okay, that's just not reading it. But what ends up happening is they have a false sense of security. They think something is occurring. They think the vendor is responsible, so they don't even worry about it. And that's in trouble because now you have a big gap. You have a big blind spot that you're completely unaware of until something happens. And you're like, oh, I thought that was your job. No, it's not my job. And then, that you have that finger pointing, the Spider-Man finger pointing business going on. It happens. The other thing is you have to read the contract to understand the security implications of the contract. So we were looking at a new reporting platform for pen tests at one point. And this was last year sometime, looking to kind of make stuff better. And we were looking and kind of digging into the security of the product. And, you think about it, pen test reports have a ton of very sensitive information in it. So under no circumstances do you want to expose that to the internet without proper security in place. Well, turns out the vendor of this specific product allowed their engineers to get into the instance for the reports, meaning someone else that I don't have any vetting responsibility or I don't have the ability to vet or prevent from coming into my platform where all these sensitive reports are, now has access. What that means now is if they get breached, which I don't manage their security, I don't know how well secure they are, I obviously don't trust it because of that, now I'm in trouble. And then everyone else who uses that product is now in trouble because just one person gets breached, they now have access to all the stuff. And we've seen in the news several cases where that's happened. I think Microsoft has had that happen. Who else? There's quite a few people recently. MSPs have had that happen where they get breached, all their clients are breached. There's another big product as well.
I want to
can't
say
remember.
like LastPass or something was similar.
Yeah, I think so. They ended up they could pull the encrypted lock boxes or whatever they want to call them, but they weren't actually encrypted the way they said they were encrypted. It was really old encryption and supposedly easy to crack. I don't know. That's what they said in the news report. But that's part of it too, right? They're telling you it's secure, and as you start inquiring, and I know to inquire because I'm thinking from the mindset of a hacker because that's what I tend to do. How would I take advantage of these guys? And I can just logically work my way into this organization and steal data, in my mind. And so that's another thing. I guess most people can't really do that, but you do need to put yourself in, what can go wrong here? Devil's advocate. What can go wrong here? How can this be abused? And understand the implications of it. Ask those questions. How is this secure? Can anyone else get access to this data? And really understand that before signing the contract, because that's getting you in trouble big time. I think it was a European accounting firm where they were pushing out malware through the updates as well. Every client's now popped because the vendors popped. So it's like trust no one, right? Back to the theme. I think that'll be in the summary. Trust no one. Boom. Let's see what else. What's it called? I don't know why I can't think of this. Basically where they have like a certain amount of time they have to respond. What's that called?
Yes.
Why are we
SLA?
blanking? SLA. There we go. I was like, man, we've worked too hard today coming here doing this crap. Yeah. So SLA is a big one. And you want to hold your vendors responsible if they're not adhering to the SLA. So service level agreement is what SLA means. So for instance, if you have a third party to manage your SOC, so SOC as a service type model, there's usually an SLA for each severity of alert that comes through. So if there's a critical, they may have, 10, 15 minutes to alert you and let you know something bad is going on. And then it goes down. Well, the time increases, the lower the severity. So there's an inverse relationship there for obvious reasons. But if you have a vendor who is consistently missing that SLA, they're violating their contract. And that's not good, especially if it is a legitimate concern. You have a vendor that's not doing what the contract states. So having some compensating measure in the contract. So what happens if the SLA is violated? Do you get money back? Do you get a discount on your thing? What happens? And I have seen where they give like a monetary discount on, especially if it's a subscription model, for everyone that's missed. And that's kind of a good thing because they're less likely to miss it because they don't want to lose money. And it's kind of like a construction worker who gets a bonus for finishing earlier. The earlier they finish, the more money they get. So you really have a good driver, a good motivator to get a high quality or a high level of service from that particular vendor. So that's what 3. So those are probably the big ones. And then comes into play with support as well. How fast do they reply? So like going back to talking about SIMs, I've been talking with a lot of SIM vendors lately. And one of the big things we have a concern for is parsers. I was talking about it earlier. How, can we build our own parser? If not, if you have to build what's the turnaround? Right now I have a client whose turnaround time with their vendor for a parser is months. We've been waiting for 3 months for a parser.
That's
Like
ridiculous.
what?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's freaking ridiculous. But these are things you need to be aware of in the contract. What is the turnaround time on these things that are important? Because the problem with like this particular company, if the turnaround's that long and there's going to be, and the company's always evolving and adapting, adding new appliances, they're not going to be able to keep up. So now you have all these logs that can't be parsed out or searched properly. Now you have a gap. You have a visibility gap big time. So that's another thing, SLA.
I tested one product that they promised a bunch of stuff and then never actually materialized. And so that was a big breach of contract. And it wasn't a little contract. It was pretty hefty in price. So I don't know what actually happened. Again, not the business side of the house, right? But found, issues with the data being passed. It was actually a SIM product as well. So like the data not being normalized or parsed the way they said it would be, similar to what you mentioned, right? It was on their end, not ours. Like we confirmed we're shipping it in the right way, but the display was actually where it was getting messed up. And it was such a disaster. Like, if you think about it though, you go through in a larger company, right? Obviously, time to contract is probably smaller in a smaller business. But if you go through an RFP process and then you have people submit to your request for papers, and then you go through the demo phase and make your selections, and then the testing phase, and then sign the contract, actually get it implemented. For larger organizations, that can take 1 year, 2 years, sometimes longer to actually get the product implemented because of, engineering hours and conflicting priorities and whatever it might be, right? So at this point, it was just a complete disaster and set the company back a large amount of money and a ton of hours on security, on engineering, whatever it might be. So definitely check your contracts. And it's also good to understand, and I think you mentioned this before, it's imperative actually as an owner to understand where the line is in the sand, right? What is your responsibility? What is mine? Because if you incorrectly assume, right, I've seen a lot of smaller organizations assume a service provider is providing security, and that might not be the case. Maybe they're only providing the product that should be doing security or whatever, but you're supposed to be responding, right? So in this case, I give you an alert, but you're supposed to respond. That's not on me. And you think that I'm responding, so you just don't take any action, and then you get ransomware, or I just steal all your stuff and then break your devices with a wiper malware. Legally, I'm in the clear because that wasn't my responsibility. I did my portion of it. So that's something that can definitely come back to haunt you, if not completely end you, depending on, the severity of the incident or the contract and the space that it's actually in.
I was thinking as you were talking about that, I was like, lessons learned from the insurance world. They're so good at specifics in their contract of what they're going to pay out for and what they're not. Like that old example of you have a house, it rains, you just have like wind insurance, but you get leaks in the roof. They're not going to pay for it because you don't have flood insurance, even though you have wind, and the wind might have caused the damage that created the leak. Because of the way the contract was written, you're going to have to pay out of pocket for it. but they're so good. And we see that with cyber insurance policies these days as well. One of the reasons the government's so careful not to do attribution to, say, a nation state is because an act of war is an exclusion in most cyber insurance policies. So if they say Russia did that, China did that, cyber insurance is not going to pay for it. That's another big hiccup in terms of attribution, which, I mean, let's be fair. Attribution is so hard to do, very difficult. There was some malware from the Olympics, and it had like 5 different signatures in it in terms of threat groups. And I don't think they ever figured out exactly who it came from, just because of how cryptic it was and how they were just putting false flags in there and just trying to mess up attribution, because very, very, very rarely can you put a finger on something and say, it's that bad guy. It's
Right.
like, well, they kind of have similar behaviors as this guy, and we'll kind of lump it together and say it's Black Cat, you know? But it's all just like, it's just throw a dart on the board and just kind of guess this thing.
Yeah. I always like it when they dox people and they're like, nope, it is first name, last name. Here's a picture of him. This is like what he does. I love that stuff because I
Someone
know
just got doxxed recently in like South America somewhere.
yeah. He was. It's our name, like it's the APT name for the NSA that was his handle, and I forgot. It's something group.
He was like, you got me. I guess I need to stop being bad now. Like, he was so like, he just admitted it was him straight up. He was like, yeah, you got me. You got me. And I've never seen anyone do that either. They're usually like, no, it wasn't me. I promise.
Yeah, that's going to annoy me now. I gotta find that group.
Yeah, I was going to talk about another thing in the contracts too, but yeah, salespeople. I wanted to beat on salespeople a little bit more before we left. Like, I love salespeople, right? Every business needs salespeople. I'm building a sales team right now for my company, but boy, do they have a way with words.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to get in trouble at a company I worked at because they would say something like, no, we don't do that. And like, shut up, man, because they'll say just about anything to make a deal happen.
Uh-huh.
But I will tell you, as a fellow business owner, if it's not in a contract, it doesn't happen. There's no guarantee it's going to happen. It's just lovely words in the air. Doesn't mean anything. It can maybe make you feel better at night. But when the time comes for them to fulfill it, if there's no record, they don't have to do anything, because usually after the sales rep is done, they get your signature on the contract. It's out of his hands. He washes his hands. He collects his commission check. Now it's moving over to like a delivery manager or a project manager or whoever to make sure whatever's in the contract is adhered to, not what he promised you. So, it's kind of like us in the job market. Sure, they can try to sell you something like, oh yeah, we do all this, we do all that. You have unlimited leave, the world's amazing. But if it's not in the contract, nothing is there to hold their feet to the fire. Nothing is there to make it happen. It's not real. It's not real. It's just made up.
And that's really good to know too, because if it's not there and it's something that was discussed, you should obviously ask to have it added to the contract. And most organizations who are on the up and up, right, they'll add it if it's something that was discussed. Maybe they legitimately forgot to include that section. Maybe it's not something that is typically included in their contract language. So always ask, and even if it's in an email, it's not enforceable if it's not in the contract. So definitely try to make sure the contract is 100% before you sign.
Read the contracts. I dated an attorney and that got beat into my head. Read the contracts. And yes, it's awfully boring. Believe me, I'd rather be doing anything else. But, focus, read this thing, highlight stuff that you want to go over with your legal team. Make sure your legal team is reading it. Have a conversation. Like you said, we can believe in the best in everyone. And that probably is the case for the most part, except for salespeople. But, no, I'm just kidding. But definitely take the time to read it and make sure it reflects what you agreed upon 100%. And then make sure all those other things we talked about in the contract, that there's an SLA in there, there's some sort of repercussions for not adhering to the contract. Just Know it well, make sure it's implemented, and read the damn thing.
Yeah, what's the saying? Read the damn manual. Cool. I think we've hit contracts pretty hard.
POC or it didn't happen.
Yep.
That's another one.
So after you sign the contract, you've decided to purchase something. Comes the fun part, for us at least, the implementation. Also, in your contract, are they helping you set it up, or
Yes.
are you on your own and you get to go read some docs that probably are not accurate, which we find a lot of.
So here's a question for you. Would you rather set it up yourself internally as an organization, or would you rather hire it out to the vendor, have them set it up for you? What's your thoughts?
So it depends on the product and the experience that my team or myself has and the perceived complexity, right? So for some reason, it seems like everyone is in the sim business right now, making their own sims. So
Sim for everyone, Oprah style.
yeah, I would buy and have someone implement that. I mean, I could probably implement it, but like,
You don't want to, man.
yeah,
Trust me.
I know. So that, like, I'm definitely paying for it. But if it's, we'll say email security, right? That should be simple enough. Hook it into O365, hook it into my Gmail tenant, whatever it is, configure the rules, send a few test emails, confirm what I'm expecting to happen happens, and then call it a day. And this is everywhere too, right? Like, I get ads for having a company file to basically create an LLC. They're like, well, we'll charge $200 and we'll file your LLC for you. It's free. You just go to Google, get the form and fill it out. And then you send your payment to your state to have it officially documented as a business, right? So it exists everywhere. And I think that you can absolutely implement something yourself, but make sure it's something that you're capable of doing and not just choosing to do it to save money, because that can actually cost you more money in the long run. You don't implement it right, something happens, or you just like spend all your money on the product, which hopefully is not the case, and then you can't afford to have them implement it for you. So I would say it depends. But I am not handy myself. Like, computers, I'm fine, but when it comes to like physical manual labor, that's definitely my dad's area and not mine. So in that regard, I'm paying 100%.
Let's see your hands, man. Let's see it. Where the calluses?
I mean, I lift weights.
Like, physical labor is not my game, man.
Nah, dude, it's not. But I know it,
These
right?
hands are meant for a keyboard.
Yeah, but I know it. Whereas he's worked with his hands his entire life.
Yeah.
So like I'll pay and he'll implement it 100%. That's how that would go.
I think the key with implementation, well, with deciding whether or not, is the complexity. Like, Sims get complex
Mhm.
incredibly fast, depending on what it is. And like, there's a lot of pieces to it. Like, I mean, I've seen massive organizations who are like, yeah, we got engineers, we'll take care of it. And oh my God, it's the worst thing ever. And you just want to rip your hair out because it's so poorly implemented. It becomes so slow. You can't do anything with it. And we're just like, what the heck is this thing they gave us?
Mhm.
And that could have been a case where you should probably at least have some sort of maintenance plan or support plan with the vendor that can help you troubleshoot the issues. I mean, I'm definitely a big believer in having some sort of support plan, typically with the vendors, because otherwise you're kind of stuck in the back of the queue. But if you have them, they can usually help you fix stuff quickly, or much more quickly. They can hop on a call. Good vendors, anyways, not all vendors. Sometimes you're just like, why am I paying you? Like, you're just asking me the same question I just gave you. All this. I'm sure people feel this way when they call a help desk. They're like, I told you all these things, and now we're going to go through the same things one more again.
It's like when you apply to a job and it's like, upload your resume, and then the next page is fill out your job history.
Oh yeah,
I'll leave.
exactly like that.
I won't do it.
Or they like forward you to someone you can't understand, and it's like, I don't know what you're saying. I really need to fix this problem. You're adding to my headache now. I'm getting yelled at, so now I have like triple headache. It's not helping. Yeah. Support's the next one. What the heck? I'm jumping ahead here.
You're just rolling right in.
Well, let's go. Is there anything else about implementation that are like keys that you've seen to help, I would say, to help it be successful and to keep the project on track? Because I think those are huge ones there, because projects can get unwieldy quickly, get off task quickly. What are some things you can recommend to help people keep the project moving along, keep that momentum, and get it implemented in time?
So my experience is a little limited in that area, but I would say it's important to have someone who's dedicated to that if it is like being billed as a project, right? You need to have someone who is actually responsible for moving that project along and making sure that everything is actually being done to whatever specifications were predetermined, right? Whether that's I'm going to implement it, here's their documentation on best practices, or I'm going to have 10 hours of support with said vendor to actually set this up. But after that, I would test again, because we have seen, well, at least I've seen, I'm sure you have as well, going back to the implementation piece, right? You think you've got it all figured out. You're like, yes, I did it. And then you run something, nothing happens. And you're like, well, this is an iCar file, which should be detected by all antivirus engines. And I just installed this brand new antivirus and nothing happened. And then it turns out, oh, well, it's not actually on. Like, sure, you pushed it out, but you didn't turn it on everywhere or something, So I'm definitely cautious of that. And I think it's important to, once something is implemented, to look at, if you can, to look at the utilization that is occurring, whether that's from an endpoint perspective, what is the CPU, the network, how am I now impacting? Whereas previously we didn't have an agent. If it's, an endpoint agent that's being installed or whatever, do I have more network latency now that I have something in line that is collecting logs or collecting traffic? So what have I just pushed to all of my employees or clients or whatever may be the case that might not have been intended or might have been unknown? And I think that's important to know, right? Because you need to get that in your acceptable of risk, or it's not really risk, but you need it to be something that is usable, but also not detrimental to business operations.
Operations are king. I think a good point there that you made, and something to tie back to requirements in testing, is after you implement, you should have certain use cases that you're running to make sure it's running as planned. Like, sure, you were doing some testing and making sure things met requirements, but you didn't test with it fully implemented across the board. So you want to make sure it's doing what you bought it to do, which is basically rerunning test cases. If that's a firewall, maybe attempting to do some traffic that should be blocked just to make sure it's working, or antivirus throwing a couple of malware samples on there, like controlled malware samples. Don't just drop ransomware around that mess. Please don't, and then yell at me. But like, my point is, you should have some sort of test in mind to ensure it's doing the thing you paid for, period.
Yeah, and I've got an example of that. We were looking at something specifically around external storage, and we weren't quite sure if external storage was being scanned the same way that, being written to disk was. So went to Malware Bazaar, got a couple of samples of various ransomware and other spyware, info stealers, et cetera, put it on the thumb drive, put it on the computer. Nothing happened. When I opened it in Explorer, okay, can I move it to disk? I wrote it to disk. That's weird. Nothing happened. What if I tell it to scan this directory? Everything's quarantined. Okay, so now I know it's not being scanned on write. It's being scanned at an interval or on execution, which I did test execution afterwards because I trust my tools.
It was in a sandbox. Wink, wink.
It was, well, execution, I actually just made a interpreter payload and then did that. Yeah, I wasn't actually going to run.
Controlled chaos, people. He's not just running random shit on computers most of the time.
But yeah, so stuff like that, going back to the use cases before and after, right? Like, that is something that needs to be tested and you might find stuff that isn't documented in the product, right? So they're probably not going to be like, oh, hey, by the way, if you put malware on a thumb drive and plug it into your computer, we're not going to see it until you actually try to execute it, right? Because that opens them to some form of risk. Or, if I'm a bad actor and I'm reading that, I'm like, okay, cool. Well, I'm about to make a rubber ducky, and then we're going to shove some malware into computers and see what happens. And a rubber ducky, for those of you who might not be aware, is basically a thumb drive that is listed as a keyboard or like some input device and runs commands when it's inserted automatically to, typically it'll be PowerShell or a command prompt to gain code execution. It'll spit out a bunch of characters that do bad things.
They got some cool stuff. Yeah, I mean, I think Anthony and I are just both believers in testing the stuff, just testing it. And that's probably from our purple mindset, which is we don't trust stuff until we test it and kick the tires on it. And that's just who we are as people, I think. But you do want those types of people in your organization that, well, what if? Play the what if game, because you don't know. And like you said, a lot of the vendors aren't going to give you this comprehensive list of things it can and can't do, because the bad guy likely has access to that same list. And if they can read it, they can say, okay, all I got to do is tweak my payload like this, or tweak my technique like this, and now I can bypass it. So they want to make people work for it. It's just like if you look at most antivirus, most EDR tools, you don't have access to the logic of how they're detecting anything. I assume for that reason. I don't know, honestly. I don't know, but I assume it's for that reason. And they make you do a lot of work to try to get some sort of understanding of how it's working. I mean, there's ways to play with the detection engine itself, the scanning engine. There's some fun stuff you can do to figure that out. But at the end of the day, they're still not making it easy for you for a reason. They want to increase the level of knowledge, level of capability needed to do this thing. And that's why when we say, you'll hear both of us bash EDR, AV, and other security tools regularly. But the truth is that most adversaries won't be attempting to bypass this stuff. They're just they're script kiddies. That's what we call them. They're not very sophisticated. They don't understand their tools that well. They don't have the ability to adjust and adapt to the environment. There's a very small subset of attackers who have that capability. And those are the people that we're talking about that can bypass this type of stuff for the most part.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many different ways to bypass stuff nowadays too, regardless of security or otherwise, right? Like, if it's a logging and I have access to execute commands, can I just stop that port that is being used, or route it to loopback or whatever, right? So there's a ton of stuff that you can't do, which is both scary and also interesting to our side. But I think that's something that, small businesses probably aren't, or before this might not be aware of, and we could definitely help there with the testing or kind of best practices or whatever it might be, right? As far as giving feedback to what we've seen or what we would recommend.
I think when you look at security, at least my approach anyways, is as your maturity, level of maturity of your cybersecurity program improves, the complexity of your adversary, or the skill of your adversary, is going to have to increase to get around your security measures. So if you're just you don't have anything, you might have Windows Defender on and that's it. And you might have Gmail's phishing stuff. And so you have this brand new email campaign with a payload that's never been seen before, and it might get around all that stuff. They're just mass send it out. They have maybe a 10% click rate and execution rate. It's going to work. It's going to work on these small businesses, these small law firms, these small real estate offices, whatever. But if you take it to a larger bank or a national store with a full security team or a big franchise hotel, it's probably not going to work, because they have other compensating controls or a higher level of security that's going to detect that, like actual phishing tools in place that are going to scan this stuff. And once detected, it's going to prevent it from being it's going to pull it out of everyone else's inbox. There are going to be things in place to make it much more difficult with a bigger budget. I hate to say that, bigger budget, more stuff. But like, there's a flip side to that. I mean, not to get on another soapbox, but the more money you have, the bigger your attack surface is going to be, and the harder it is to rein in that attack surface. I mean, I've pen tested huge companies, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we got all this cool stuff." Okay, cool. And then you just find this one small little thing, and whoop, that's all you need. But the point is that there are some dangers of having such a big attack surface and such a large and complex network, is that there are more entry points or more things that an attacker can take advantage of, where a smaller network that's tightly controlled and has a solid security program is probably going to be a lot tougher of a target for a bad guy, hands down.
Yeah. Speaking on dangers, where are some dangers that we should be looking out for when it comes to vendors?
Liars, snake oil salesmen.
Yeah.
I mean, those are all real dangers. I mean, there's tons of snake oil salesmen these days, 100% for
Very
sure. I
true.
see them all the time on LinkedIn. It is what it is. That's part of doing business, is you have to harden your security against bad vendors, harden your brain, and don't let them take you out for drinks and get you half drunk inside a contract. But for real, there's a lot of vendor dangers. Like we spoke about earlier, where they're not really as secure as you think they are. Their product is just a pretty demo, and that's it. It's really just the MVP. And they're on their third round of funding, and they're just making this crap up as they go. So for me, I will tell you that I will almost always advise against using an immature vendor. If they've only been around a couple of years, I'm going to say I would not do it. And the reason why is because they probably haven't given a crap about security at this point. They're just trying to get a product. They're trying to make sales. They're trying to continue to get dollars so that they have a steady stream of revenue and they can feed operations. We'll worry about security later when we get complaints. That's how it always works, almost always. Security for products doesn't make money early on. It's a product doing a thing, not actually securing the platform itself. So they're going to focus on the thing it was designed for, not the back-end security. Every time. I don't know anything that has been secure one or early on in the life of whatever that product is.
Yeah. Typically, security is a cost center, not a revenue center.
Yeah. I mean, most businesses think of it that way anyways. And to some extent it is, until you have a breach. And then it's costing you a lot of money.
Yeah. That is definitely a cost center.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, how about you? I mean, have you seen any crazy thing you're like, yeah?
So, yeah, we had the story earlier with the SIM. EDR vendors like lying, and not necessarily lying, but saying they detect one thing or detect everything, and it's a specific way, and it's very simple or low on the pyramid of pain, such as renaming the file, right? Like, we've seen that work in many products where I drop a malicious file, it gets detected, cool, change the name, no longer detected. I even masqueraded as or impersonated the security product for a long time with my malicious files, which gave me a good laugh, and I'm sure made them have to reconsider some things, how they were doing business. But definitely the snake oil piece, the lying piece. I also want to add a new one. I saw this on LinkedIn. Scummy business practices. So this guy, I really wish he didn't black out the name of the individual who sent him this message, but this guy is a business owner. He was reached out to by a salesperson for an organization, and basically it said, hey, I looked up your company. I see X number of individuals have open to work banners on their LinkedIn profiles. Do you want this list? It can be good as like a backup to see who's trying to leave your company, blah, blah, blah.
Whoa.
Yeah. And the CEO rightfully was like, absolutely not. I trust them and I support them looking for other endeavors if that's what they choose to do.
Good
And at
for
the
him.
end, he said, hope that every person you ask tells you no, because this is like such an ugly business practice. You're basically trying to like out people looking for a job for whatever reason it might be. And then he said, like, he supports his associates doing side hustles, or maybe they're looking for part-time jobs and they're a part-time employee, so they have that extra time available to work. Like, they're not hitting their 40 hours, right? So maybe they need something else in order to actually, I don't know, make a living. It was, I don't know, like, I wanted to punch the guy who asked the question, right? Like, it's ridiculous that someone could see this, and especially people who are looking for work. It's not like, oh, hey, I'm trying to sell company secrets, right? It's like, for whatever reason that it is, you're looking for a new role or additional income, and then some dude's trying to just out you to your CEO so he can fire you.
I guess the lesson here, there are some good CEOs still in this world who don't care. I'm like, cool, more power to you. Find happiness versus, all right, I'm gonna go ahead and fire all these people.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it.
Yeah.
So also, I've seen a lot of, and this is definitely a security thing, and I think it's a poor reflection of the stigma of security people or IT people, if we want to make it a wider breadth, where sales companies will hire models for like Black Hat or
I did not know you were going there. Yes, this is very much true.
like they'll
Jeez.
hire legit
The
models
lampshades, I
and like,
remember that
yeah,
was a big thing this year.
promo models to
Boy.
just like stand at booths and like try to get people to buy. And basically they're saying, you've never had a pretty girl talk to you before, so let me talk to you and make you feel warm and fuzzy, and then give us your money.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen all variations of this social engineering attack, where any customer, I don't want to say support. It was more like the project manager for the clients would be pretty women, and that was it. They would only hire women for the roles for that purpose,
Mm-hmm.
get them on camera and whatever. And I heard from a friend who ended up moving at some time later, working for one of the people that were a client that left being a client because they were basically shoving like these women in their face all the time. It was like, this is demeaning. I'm not supporting this. And that's why they ceased to be a client, because of that.
Yep.
Good for y'all. What? I mean, it happens too. You go to these vendor get-togethers at these big conferences. That's what they do too. Like, you hear about the clubs and all that stuff, and that sells in Vegas.
Yeah, I will say too, like, I went to medicine conference. I don't know any other way to put it.
Medicine conference. What?
Yeah, my stepmom is in medical area, and she was down where I was living, and she had a conference to go to, so I went, and it was a bunch of doctors and med assistants and stuff, but it was a ton of beautiful women. And going back to like the getting doctors to write certain scripts and like pharma companies, right?
Yeah.
It was that. I'm like, oh, this really does happen.
It's wild. To slightly skew away from good-looking people, like, have you ever heard, and I had a person reach out to me one time where they had a vendor saying, we found a vulnerability, and we are able to exploit it. Pay us money or we're going to leak it on the internet. And they were like, can you find this vulnerability before they leak it so that we can fix it? We don't want to pay them because they're so shady. Yeah, it's like, what? This is a thing? Yes, it is. It is a thing. Shady people everywhere, man. It's insane. I had another good one too. Vendors are something. Some of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's interesting because there was one company that I set a meeting up with, and the first thing they said was, hey, your website's been hacked. Remember who that was?
You talking about me? I didn't charge them for that information. I just let them know because I'm a friendly hacker.
Yeah. No, but that's a good example. But
Yeah.
I thought it was
I'm
funny
I'm a
because
nice vendor when I'm a vendor.
yeah, I obviously thought you were joking because we couldn't see it on our side. So we were like, no, and then all of us checked, and none of us got it to render.
That was a good hack, actually.
Yeah,
I was like, all right, that's impressive. Solid.
just to add flip side to exploiting a vulnerability and trying to blackmail somebody versus like, hey, I found this. More of a security researcher aspect.
Yeah, I mean, there's this whole group of researchers. This was a huge movement too. I mean, to segue a little. Here we go. We're segueing late at night because we're recording, and we've already been fed and watered and all the stuff, like animals. But yeah, there's a really good podcast on it actually, and I want to say it might have been Darknet Diaries that did one. Shout out Darknet Diaries, where basically all the major vendors, so like Microsoft, were kind of being jerks at the time and being like, "We're going to sue you if you put that out." And you still see that sometimes at like DEF CON or Black Hat. They kind of notify the vendor, give them time to fix the vulnerability, and like, all right, well, we're going to publish our research and do a talk about it. And they're like, no, you won't. We'll sue you. So go for it. And then the researchers are like, all right, you got me. I'm poor. I don't have billions of dollars to throw out a lawsuit. And they'll do that. And so you have this whole movement at one point where they're like, no vulnerabilities for free, no exploits for free. Because of that, they're like, we want to do this. We want to be, all these vendors telling the world we're secure. We believe in security first. And then on the other hand, they're saying we're going to sue you if you release this research, but we're going to take a whole year to fix this problem, and you're not allowed to tell anyone about it. And you'll see that in bug bounty programs too, where they continuously say like this is a duplicate or this isn't a vulnerability or whatever it is, not to take it seriously. And I've read cases where they say that and then they fix it kind of under the table, and they don't even pay the researcher, which is kind of like sucks because they don't get paid unless they find something that's accepted. So they just spent who knows how much time kind of digging into this specific company, and they don't get paid for it. So there's all kind of stuff like that out there. It's insane. But that's where the black market for exploits came about as well, where they're like, all right, well, I'm a good researcher. You don't want to pay me. You just kind of tell me to F off. I'll sell it to governments or whoever wants to pay me good money for it, and I'll let you deal with the fallout.
Yeah. I would definitely fall in that category, knowing myself. And speaking of governments, because I was going to say Pegasus Group, which feeds into one of the things I read was a report. This guy basically submitted a vulnerability to Apple, and I believe Apple's main thing, right, is like if you can gain access to the pre-installed apps like calendar, contacts, messages, etc., that's a higher tier of payout, right? Because it's like proprietary to them kind of thing. It's not like a third-party app, whatever. And that's also probably where your sensitive data is. So the guy figured out something, and then they only paid him. They paid him like the third-party rate, which was like a fraction. I want to say it was like a fifth of what it should have been, because basically, if he exploited his exploit, he got full control. He could access anything, right? So by that logic, he could access calendar, messages, etc. But they're like, well, actually, it just lives here, and then something else is happening, so we're not paying you for that something else. You're only getting paid for this first part that you brought to our attention, kind of thing. And that's terrible because, thinking about Pegasus, who writes, or not Pegasus, what's the group? The spyware is Pegasus. What's the actual group?
NSO.
Yes. That pays big money, right? Like, I think their latest one, they got outed at least, was like invite to a calendar in the past, like an event that has happened in the past automatically got added to your calendar for some stupid reason.
Oh, that's clever.
And so that was how they got into your phone. And then there was one, I don't remember if it was Apple or Microsoft, but there was another vulnerability through the calendar. I want to say it was Outlook, actually. Yeah, it was. Hate Outlook. But you could attach your own like alert or not a sound, like for when the meeting is coming up or whatever, like however many minutes ahead of time. You could attach your own sound. So you could attach another file that is externally hosted, and it would automatically get executed when the calendar event happened. Like, why does that need to be a thing, right? But there's weird stuff that happens, and then going back to Microsoft, a lot of times Microsoft is like, it's not a vulnerability, that is a capability that is meant to be. You're just not meant to exploit it that way.
It's a feature.
Yeah,
that stuff's pretty interesting. And you're right, like that's why a lot of people, I guess, are kind of going to the dark side. It's much more profitable to sell it to a government. There's even certain companies, like other third parties, you can sell it to, and they'll deal with any legal backlash. They'll give you a fraction of what the bounty would be, not to the company itself. Like if you were to, since you said Apple, like I give it to Apple, they're going to kind of mess with me and not pay me the full thing. So they might give me like a tenth of what it is. You sell it to them, they might give you like a quarter of what it is, and then they'll sell it and get like millions of dollars for it or whatever. It happens. And I'll tell you too, it's not all the vendor's fault. What they're going to do is they're not going to read into the vulnerability. They're going to read it exactly how you submit it as well. So if you don't do a really good explanation of the issues and, POC or shut up, right? If you don't do a POC that shows all these things you're talking about, they're not going to pay you. You have to demonstrate the impact. We hear that all the time in the industry. Demonstrate impact. 100%. They're not going to pay you if you can't demonstrate impact. And that's kind of like a fine balance in pen testing we have to take, as well as, like, say, I know I can put this screen or like this system into a blue screen of death, like loop. Am I going to do it? Probably not. But I'll try to convey that it's possible. Now, if you want me to prove it in your game, let's go. But if you're not, I'm not going to do it. That's why I don't do denial of service conditions most of the time. They're almost always excluded from scoping. There's no point. Like if we can say, all right, this version's vulnerable to this. Okay, cool. Just take my word for it. You don't want me to denial. Who cares? Just patch. Okay, come on. But yeah, I mean, people just have to explain their stuff well, and I've seen that a lot. I used to almost every day I'd wake up before I went to work, and when I was in the bug bounty scene, like a lot, like following people and reading stuff, I'd read the reports for bounty programs just to see what people submitted. It's because I like knowing what's possible. I like seeing people's techniques and stuff like that, and always having it in the back of my mind when I do a pen test to check stuff like that out. But yeah, sometimes it was very vague, and they'll just put like 2 sentences and like, oh, this thing's bad. Here you go. Here's a little thing, and they can't recreate it. They don't really understand what this person's talking about, and they just deny it. Treat it like it's a paid thing, which it is, and give them a proper report. Explain step by step, do a video, give them the code, talk to it really well, and then submit it. And not only that, a lot of times you'll hear some of the big bounty people, and I do this too, pen testing, where go the whole way. Be patient before you submit. See if you can do anything else with it, especially like mediums. So these are like lower severity findings for those of you who haven't seen a report, because sometimes we can chain multiple lower findings together and make our way to a high impact finding just with some patience, just with a little bit of playing around. Some people give up too early. And I'll tell you, a lot of times, if I'm in a really tough organization doing a pen test, I may not get my full attack chain completed until like the last day, like 4 hours before the test is over with, because my brain's just going a million miles an hour, just trying to think of possibilities. I work better under stress. It just happens. And it's that patience, just sticking with it, continuing. And you can go, for people who are in that line of work, you can go from maybe getting a few $100 to thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, depending on what it is. If you get what we call like arbitrary code execution, depending on what like Apple, I think they pay millions of dollars for arbitrary code execution or zero click exploitation. It's a lot of money if you can get that. So yeah, I mean, that's a huge segue there, but I just wanted to say both sides. The vendors aren't completely to blame. Sometimes it's the researchers as well. We all have a place in the blame of the security game.
Yeah. And when you were talking, I thought of something too that I've seen in other organizations where something is reported, but they again take it at face value. So if you say, hey, I gained access to this portal, right? Then, okay, that's bad. You shouldn't have access to this because you're on a guest account or whatever. Cool. Change guest permissions. Now you can't access it. But if you had access to the portal, there was also like a password that was hidden in the website or something that then would have helped you achieve your objectives for your penetration test. Like, that's way different than just like, oh, well, I got here kind of thing. So I definitely see the full attack path needing to be laid out. And also when new vulnerabilities come out, right, a lot of times it's like that panic mode and there's no real contextualization around the impact to the organization. It's just like the Linux print spooler, right? But it's a 9.9, it's worse than any other vulnerability, blah, blah. But then people are like, dude, I've never had a printer work on Linux. Does it actually matter if it doesn't work? Maybe not.
Yeah.
Maybe it does matter and it's horrible. Who knows?
Yeah, those are ones where you really have to check, and it's good to have an offensive team in-house. It obviously doesn't happen in smaller organizations, but for bigger organizations, you'd be like, hey, see if you can make this work. Try to see how widely it impacts the organization. That's the thing. That's the thing that organizations actually do. For small organizations, what's the best thing you can do? Patch. Whatever they say, just patch it. Turn off the configuration. And I say that like partly in jest, but you have to think like a lot of these organizations don't have the manpower or woman power, the person power, or they don't have the expertise to take a POC. It's a proof of concept of POC. So for those of you who don't know, I keep saying, I think I've said it a bunch of times and I never explained it. It's a proof of concept. So it's usually a code or an example of how to take advantage of the exploit. A lot of times you'll find them on GitHub. And how I find them is whatever the attack is, if I think it's there, I just type name of attack, POC, GitHub.
Yep.
And then I go look for it. Yes, it's that simple to hack, everyone. But you get there and then I read through the code, of course, and see what it's doing and try to understand it. But that's what it is. Like, for all intents and purposes, most of them you can take and run with little modification. Yeah, there's a low barrier to entry. That's why there's a big divide in the hacker community where it's like, no, don't give out POCs because that gives these script kiddies and low-skill hackers a tool that they don't have to be knowledgeable about. And the other half is like, who cares? Screw it. That'll make them fix the problem faster than not doing it. So you kind of have a couple of different mindsets competing there. Yeah, small businesses, they just need a patch, get with their, if they have a managed IT company or something like that, hey, I saw this thing in the news. What do we do? Or they have a pen testing company that they're on good terms with. I'm sure they won't mind if you reach out like, hey, do you have any information about this? Sharing, some companies do that. Yeah, I mean, it's ask. That was another thing I was going to add to you about just talking about vendor contracts. If you don't know something, ask, explain this thing to me. That is the best thing you can do as anybody interacting with a vendor, because we all use different languages. Same, like I probably have a slightly different lexicon than you do, Anthony, and you the same, just because our backgrounds are slightly different, and that's okay. But we can understand each other because like I tell you all the, I don't know what you're talking. What do you explain that, please? Like all the time, especially when you text me. I'm like, what do you mean? It's like pieces. What are you talking about? I don't know what you mean. But yeah, ask the vendor to explain. What do you mean by this? And sometimes they just make up crap, just sound cool, and you don't know what it means. So explain. What does this thing mean to me? I was going to talk about vendor dangers. I pulled up the thing. It was a Ukrainian software company that did accounting software, and they were hacked, and they embedded ransomware into the update. And so whenever they push the update, like the clients pull the update, it just launches ransomware across the entire network. Well, onto the system, which then spread
Right.
across the network. Yeah, which was a pretty clever. I mean, that's pretty much what happens with SolarWinds and whoever else. We just spread. But yep, cool historical breaches. I guess that's one of those.
SolarWinds for sure.
SolarWinds was a cool one. What was that antivirus that was backdoor? Was it Kaspersky? I think like Russians had a backdoor or something.
Yeah. I don't know if that was ever proven.
Oh, but it was banned by U.S. government.
It has been banned, yes. Also, I was actually, thank you. My aunt texted me and she was like, hey, we were using Kaspersky. They're now banned by the U.S. government. And I guess it's banned for like citizens, not just the government anymore. And so Kaspersky basically dropped a different antivirus and didn't tell anyone that this was happening to like replace themselves. And she was like, what should I use? What, like, I don't know anything about this company. Should I trust them? Why? Like, I trusted Kaspersky, now they're banned, right? Like that kind of scenario. And I was like, well, you're probably fine with like Defender if you're on Windows, right? But then it turned out like she's not even worried about endpoint stuff. It's more the browser and like keeping her passwords and banking info secure, right? So
yeah, don't save it in your browser. Step one.
Yeah. Google has passkeys now, and it's tied to my fingerprint, so I'm fine. I haven't found a password manager that I like. That's what it is.
So this is the case where Anthony knows this is wrong, yet he's still doing it personally because he's lazy.
Yeah, drinking is bad, yet you still do it.
Touche.
Yeah.
Touche. But this has nothing to do with my security. I'm not driving.
Look, man, I'm just saying. No, but if you have recommendations, I mean, I'll definitely take them.
Like, how many times have you seen someone steal stuff out of the browser? Like,
you know what's bad? I've done it. Like, that's...
Yeah, I thought you did. I wasn't going to say anything. I was like, I know you know better. Hands down.
Not only do I know better, so I'm not a script kiddie, but I'm definitely not writing my own code. That's just, I don't care. Don't really care to learn that side of the house. I like other things, like touching grass.
He hates coding.
But I have stolen passwords and cookies out of Chrome and used them before. So like, it's very simple. But yeah, if you got password manager recommendations, yeah.
Yeah, Apple just released a new one. Their old one actually wasn't that bad. It's cross-platform. The one, it's part of iCloud. It's not too shabby, but they do have a new one. Check it out. It's free. Both of them are free. I like to use free stuff that actually works. Apple, I have some trust with Apple more so than other places because they've told the FBI to go F themselves plenty of times, which is, you get bonus points in my book for telling the government to go.
See, now away. I feel like you need to explain why that's a good thing to some people who might not understand why not cooperating with law enforcement can't be beneficial.
Yeah, because I'm probably like, whoa, this guy is a criminal. Yeah. He doesn't like law enforcement. So I'm a big advocate in privacy. So that's one thing. So I believe if you can protect anything, you should. Any type of data, you should. I don't think anyone should have access to it. Apple, well, I don't think it works anymore because the FBI has a way around it now. But it used to be where they had to get a court order or try to get a court order and force Apple to unlock phones, to get access to iCloud and all that stuff, but they had it locked to where only that specific user could do that. And of course, that had some cascading effect where they would allow, like with a court order, they could force you to put your thumbprint or use your whatever biometric to unlock the device. But, privacy is privacy. I know there's some downsides to it, but I think overall, I think there's a more positive impact in having some semblance of privacy in this world where privacy is very difficult to achieve. So I like that, contrary to stuff like Google or whoever, name your big vendor that's global who will say, I don't need a court order. Here you go, without a court order. Like, not to say they do that. I don't want to spread misinformation, but I will say they are more willing to open themselves up and participate with whatever government. It's not even just the U.S. It could be China, Russia, whoever. They're more likely to cooperate with less reasoning or less. They're not necessarily required to cooperate, but they will. Where Apple's like, my customers deserve privacy, so we shall give them privacy.
That gets even more complex and important in certain regions of the world that don't have privacy laws similar to ours in the US.
Korea, Middle East.
Yeah, just getting us canceled after episode 2. Good job.
Yep. It happens. Now I'll have people going after me.
No, I agree though. There's obviously more times than not, you as an individual are not breaking the law. So there's no real need for your data to be publicly available or accessible, whether that's law enforcement or data brokers selling your entire search history. But,
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, we've been talking about vendors. Name one vendor that has kept your stuff completely safe. You can't. Even the government, like when they're supposed to be doing all the clearances, how many times have they been breached? They're supposed to be the protectors of all the packets on people who get clearances are massive. And now these countries, these nation states have everybody's information that has ever got a clearance up to that point, that is. It's like, what? So, used to be this whole thing with the NSA where they wanted to put back doors and everything. And there's some interesting stories about that. However, it's like, if there's a back door in a system, all you got to do is find the back door. It's not private. It's like people who put those TSA safe locks on their suitcases. You don't think anyone else has a key to open that? Are you kidding me? My daughter could open that in 10 seconds probably. I mean, she can pick locks, but I'm just saying, it's not really keeping anyone out. You could probably buy a key on Amazon and open it right up. Some of it's ignorance, I think, but some of it's a willingness to trust people who haven't earned trust either. And, we already said at the very beginning, we are believers in the worst case scenario and trust no one. That includes the government. That includes everyone. So if we can protect privacy, if we can do a lot of work up front to just protect whatever the system happens to be, let's do it.
Yeah, there's very few vendors, if any, that have a fiduciary responsibility to you as a client.
I guess I'm my own fiduciary. I give a shit.
Man, so much to cut.
Yeah, and that's a wrap. No, are there any other cool ones? We'll do one more if we can think of one more, and then we'll wrap it up for the night. We've got a long episode tonight. And
I mean, Kaspersky was allegedly doing stuff that every other AV vendor has probably also done for their country, whether or not they know they were doing it.
Oh, I know one. I got one. I don't know if I should say their name. I won't say their name because I haven't vetted the story, so I don't want to spread misinformation. So I'll just spread misinformation with them. But I'm pretty sure it's true. I'm almost positive it's true. My dad relayed it to me.
Well, if your dad said it must be true.
Yeah, fair. He's a retired law enforcement guy, so he tells me the truth. No, basically it was a VPN appliance. So a vendor who sold a VPN appliance. Their appliances were getting hammered so bad, like so many vulnerabilities, that they changed their name to another name just to kind of lose that reputation. You're going to Google it now?
Does it start with the F?
I don't remember what their earlier name was. It starts with an I now, though.
Yep. Okay. I had one or the other on my mind.
And what's funny is I did an investigation on a breach for that appliance later, and it's just to that kind of stuff. So I will say, this is the last thing I'll say about a vendor. So reputation is a big one, and looking for systemic issues is another. So this would be difficult unless you got the name change. But if you see a vendor with just hack after hack, or massive vulnerability after massive vulnerability, it's probably a good idea to steer away from that vendor, because it's likely rotten to the core until they have massive changes. So, we're talking about risk. There is obviously inherent risk with using that vendor for anything at that point, because you have a history. We know they've had issues. a lot of issues. You know, one every few years or whatever isn't that big of a deal. It happens to everyone. But year after year, multiple, 3, 4, 5 every year, that's bad news bears. Stay away. Stay away. Don't let it, do not even get, don't even, they're not worth talking to. You're going to be a victim.
I want to say there was a vendor. I don't know if it was this company. Also, their previous name sounds like a terrible NSA tool. But there was a vendor that discovered a breach, thought they remediated it, and then the threat actor was like, "I'm still here," and then leaked more data.
That was last year or the year before, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. That was hilarious.
Me up.
Well, because a lot of them will lie too, where they're just, and what they're trying to do is set expectations and make sure their stock doesn't get hit. They're like, it's not as bad as everyone thinks. Don't worry, we have it under control. And sometimes the hackers lie too. I mean, they're criminals. I mean, what do you expect? But a lot of times they're not lying. Like if you looked, for the most part, I mean, there's a whole ransomware tracking thing. That's a huge thing too, where companies want to report ransomware. They're like, no, we didn't get hacked. And then they start leaking data. They're like, oh yeah, you did. Oh yeah, you did. And then services start going down and they have no choice but to be like, okay, you caught us. We got hacked. And that's just how it is, you know. They just have like their own self-interest in mind in a lot of cases. And you don't typically find people readily accept responsibility. And it can just be disastrous, especially when they're delaying for like weeks that they had a hack and their customers are just sitting there, just getting eaten alive.
Or a recent example that I heard of, the MSP provider got breached, and then the customers were like reaching out to their provider, getting no response. So this MSP failed to send any communication. Even if you're ransomware, you obviously have like other medium. You have LinkedIn, you have personal emails, you probably have phone nowadays. It's not a novel piece of equipment. You know, they could have notified people any which way, and it was multiple. I want to say it was through a weekend and then a full week before they actually admitted that they had been compromised. So it does happen, regardless of, you know, there's laws, right? Like, oh, you're supposed to report within however long of identifying a breach or whatever it might be.
Once you confirm, they haven't confirmed it yet. There's a lot of fun, slippery loopholes in a lot of this stuff. I've seen regulations that say you have to have a plan to fix the vulnerability. You don't have to implement it. You have to confirm. Like once you confirm that a breach occurred, then you have to notify. The notification starts. So yeah, there's a lot of slimy ways around stuff. And I want to blame leadership, but I would also love to blame attorneys for this as well. I relatively recently learned that there aren't a lot of cyber aware attorneys out there. And so you have these attorneys whose job it is to protect their clients. So what do you think they're going to do? They're not going to like, well, let's keep all that information. You know, there's a possible incident. Boom, that's it. That's all we want to put in our press release. We want plausible deniability. We weren't sure. There's a possibility. We don't have to report it yet, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But I think they're so naturally ready to just keep a lid on stuff. And I think that's part of the problem too. And then, of course, your boards who are worried about operations and impacting operations where they're going to say, oh, our customers are going to leave us. Oh, our stock's going to tank if this gets out. And so, of course, that also has some influence on what information is released. But someone posted something on LinkedIn recently where they're like, buy the dip, you know, where after there's a breach or incident, there's a huge drop off.
Yeah.
And that's where you buy, and then it goes right back up to where it was.
I was waiting for CrowdStrike to hit 200. I should have bought, because that was a great example after their large fiasco that occurred.
I was waiting for it to drop a little bit down. I have a buy order in, a buy limit waiting for it to drop down again. So CrowdStrike stock, go back down so I can get a discount. 250, please. 250.
Man.
All right. Get us out of here. So summarize the stuff if you wrote anything down this time, and let's end this bad boy.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about several things and also several tangents that may or may not exist in the final cut. But
They
starting
will
with
all exist.
your what?
So they will all exist. I'm the editor.
Let me get all in. We're actually not editing this episode. We're just pushing it
YOLO.
right out.
YOLO.
So we've discussed requirements, how that really shapes your interaction with vendors and the products that you're obviously going to be presented with. And then testing, right? Making sure that it actually meets your use case. Maybe there's additional use cases. Moving forward after your selection process to actually signing the contract, the language that needs to be involved in the contract, whether or not support is included, SLAs, service level agreements, how fast do they need to respond to a particular incident or severity of whatever realm of product they're in. The implementation piece, right? You can have all the bells and whistles, but if you don't implement it correctly, or if you pay them and they don't turn everything on that you actually paid for, then it's really not worth a whole lot. And after implementing, going back to the testing piece, making sure that you're actually checking that it is implemented correctly or validates your assumptions that you had prior to entering this contractual agreement with the vendor. Support, right? Do you need support levels? How often do you expect to reach out to support? What kind of response are you looking for? Is it, like Mike mentioned, needing support for a parser taking 3 months, which is absolutely ridiculous? Or is it, hey, I submitted a ticket, I expect a response within 24 hours? That's something that should also be included in your contract language. Vendor dangers, what to look out for. Are they selling you snake oil? Is it basically Dr. Pepper back in the day, not the good Coca-Cola? Is it someone who lies in order to get your business? Or maybe they just think that all you want to see are pretty looking people and don't actually care about their product. They just want your cash. And then briefly touched on historical breaches and some alleged allegations that may or may not have been proven. And yeah, we've covered a lot today.
The names we mentioned may not represent real companies.
Yeah, also, these are our opinions and not the opinions of our employees.
Or any business we may or may not represent.
Yeah. Also, we'll still pen test you, whoever we named.
Happy to help anytime. Cool. All right, man. Well, that is a wrap for number 2. We'll see you next time we decide to get on a microphone and resembles a real podcast. And yeah, we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.